Hey, Psychology, it's Miss Wicks. Checking in with you guys. This week we're going to be covering motivation and emotion. So we are actually almost done. Very soon we'll be done with new content. And I think, with COVID and us doing remote learning right now, this is a timely topic because it can be hard for you to stay motivated, especially if you're not at school, if you're not in your normal routine. So that's quite understandable. So today we're going to explore some of those issues with motivation and emotion. Um, the drive reduction theory is the idea that behavior is motivated by biological needs. So our goal with behavior is to satisfy the needs that we have. So if I feel hungry, I'm motivated to find food. If I'm thirsty, if I need to use the restroom, then I'm motivated to do things to take care of that urge that I have. And the idea here is that your body is constantly trying to seek its happy place that we call homeostasis. So when you're at homeostasis, you have had the optimal amount of sleep, you've had the optimal amount of food, you're perfectly happy, your body's happy, your needs have been satisfied. So we're constantly trying to get back to homeostasis. During the summer, during spring break, it's easier for us to be at homeostasis. And if you're not at homeostasis right now, it's very hard for you to feel completely balanced when there's a crisis happening. So again, if you have any uncertainty at the moment, if you're worried about health, when those Maslow needs come into play, that can definitely impact your homeostasis. Even though we're at home and we can eat when we want and go to the restroom when we want, the idea here is that, mental factors can still play a role too. So again, we see that we have nature factors that motivate us, and we also have nurture factors or psychological factors that motivate us as well. Okay, so the arousal theory states that people are motivated in ways that will maintain their optimal arousal. So by that, I mean autonomic arousal. We want to be excited, but we don't want to be scared. We want to be interested in something, but we don't want to feel threatened. Sometimes if we're trying a new hobby, if we watch a tutorial with somebody who's an expert in that already, it can be a little bit daunting. So the Yerkes-Dodson law from 1908 states that performance on a task is this interaction between the level of physiological or bodily arousal and the difficulty of the task. So in other words, if you're too stressed out, your autonomic arousal will kick in. And so we see people will have high blood pressure, they'll have heart rate increase. Sometimes with prolonged stress, it can actually cause you to go into like a physical panic attack. So a little bit of stress is good, but if we're in too much stress, that can actually hamper our performance. So you'll hear people say things like, oh, I perform better when I procrastinate, my work is better. And that may be true for some people, but at a certain point, you reach that stress threshold, and that stress can actually, instead of motivate you, it can actually hamper your performance. So the idea with the Yerkes-Dodson law is that a little bit of stress may be good, but too much stress will actually increase the anxiety and decrease the productivity that you find that you have. So when we talk about this chapter, by the way, I would definitely urge you to look into your book because there is conversation in this chapter about human sexuality, which we don't have a lot of time today to get into. But again, it's something that could pop up on the AP test is definitely, something to be aware of. Again, just for the sake of time, we don't have a lot of time to explore that particular part of the chapter, but I definitely urge you guys to read up on your own. But when it comes to the emotional needs that we have, a lot of people are driven by affiliation motive. So the idea here is that we want to fit into a group and we have to have our tribe. We need to find our people. So affiliation motive is the need to associate with others, to maintain social bonds, and that affiliation motive might not be met the same way for every person. Um, we have people who may not have a lot of friends in their face-to-face world, but they might have friends that they play video games with online. They might have, people that they associate with that maybe they don't see in person very often, but thanks to the internet and those bonds that we cultivate and those relationships we create, their affiliation needs to be met that way. When we start college, this is also a stressful time for us because of affiliation motive. When you go to a new college, again, you don't know people. Even if you're going to a college with a lot of your former high school people, it's a big campus. You might not interact with them very much. So a lot of times there's a little bit of stress until people find their people. So they join an intramural sports team, they join a fraternity or sorority, they join a group, they find a study group, so again, that is going to plug into that affiliation motive that we have. And there are survival benefits when we talk about tend and befriend. Tend and befriend is the idea that I'm taking care of myself, but I also take care of my friends. So with tend and befriend, there's benefits to being part of a network in terms of, hey, if my buddy needs a job, I'm going to put in a good word for them. I'm going to help them network. During the pandemic, I've taken toilet paper to people. I've had groceries delivered to my family and friends who have struggled a little bit more. So that's what Tend to Befriend is about, and that goes hand in hand with affiliation motive. So I've literally had former students and friends who get jobs because of their Aggie ring. It's, oh, you're part of my network, you're part of my group, okay. And it becomes like a conversation starter. But part of Tend to Befriend is that we take care of our people. So if your ring indicates that you're one of my people, I'm going to take care of you. Or I'm more likely to take care of you. We'll put it that way. Okay. Achievement motivation. For a lot of you guys, this is the reason you're continuing to work online remotely. Okay. A lot of students have, continued their studies. They've continued logging into Canvas each week and working because they have high achievement motivation. And this is really great because not everything in life has a tangible, huge reward. That would be wonderful if we were rewarded for every good thing that we did, but that's just not the case. A lot of times we're doing stuff because we have high standards and we are doing it to meet an internal goal. So again, nobody's forcing you to take an AP test this year, but most of you have indicated that you're still going to take the AP test because of achievement motivation. So we have this inborn desire to master difficult challenges, to meet goals, to not let other people down, but not let ourselves down. We want to meet high standards of excellence. And this is internal motivation, a high inner locus of control, as we also call it in psychology. And this kind of mindset is associated with progress, with academic success, with economic success later in life. These are the people who go on and become entrepreneurs, they become wealthy, and they do so because they're self-starters. They're not doing this because they want to get a reward from somebody else. They're doing this because they have high standards for themselves. So again, working super hard in a class and still continuing to work hard is more likely because of achievement motivation than anything else at this point. So people who have high achievement motivation are more future and goal oriented. They're also going to be more likely to be economically and socially successful, and they're more likely to put off short-term goals for the long-term reward. So I could go to work full-time right now for a check, but I still need to do college. I need to balance that. There were times in college where I definitely felt like the brokest person in the room, but again, putting aside the short term, oh, it'd be cool to go to that concert, has really paid off. So having that achievement motivation 20 years ago has literally changed my life, and it's changed the the situation my family's in. So achievement motivation is definitely something to cultivate, and people have achievement motivations in different areas of their life. Some people have it for fitness, some people have it for academics, some people have it for career in college, or all of the above. So it just really depends on the person. Okay. Okay, so management and motivation. Theory X is the philosophy of motivating employees by external things like external rewards, external punishments, or the threat of punishment. We find that motivating employees, and for some of you, this will be the most useful slide that we have today, but we find that for a lot of people, being someone's boss is not intuitive. It's a skill that you have to cultivate. You have to know how to keep people motivated. And our best workers are not always extrinsically motivated by outside things like a paycheck or a bonus or employee of the month parking spots. Most people who are loyal to the company are loyal to the company for other reasons. They're not just doing a good job because they want a one-time bonus. The bonus may be a nice benefit, but it's not what primarily motivates them. So this idea here is that we really have to consider what really motivates a person. For me at Caney Creek, I've been motivated to be a good employee at Caney Creek for so many years because of my loyalties to Caney Creek. My coworkers have been there for me. My bosses have had my back. I've always been very supported and encouraged at Caney Creek. So while it might be nice to get a bonus, and those are pleasant, of course, it's not my primary motive for doing my job and for staying where I work. So we also find that sometimes those rewards can backfire a little bit. The over-justification effect basically says if we reward you too often, if we monetize everything, that can actually decrease the enjoyment a person has in their job. So for example, if I'm paying you to make reviews of video games and you really love playing video games, now that I put a payment structure in place, like you have to do this is your job, suddenly you're not going to want to do it because now it seems like work. So that's the issue with the over-justification effect. If we're trying to reward you overly for something that you're going to do anyway, sometimes you lose interest in the activity. And when the reward is gone, sometimes that desire or that motivation diminishes as well. And then theory Y is that internal motivation is the most effective. So again, the relationships matter. Excuse me, the bonds that your team has together. This is where companies are going to invest in like employee picnics, company trips, they'll do motivation activities, you take a corporate retreat, because again, theory Y states that an employee is going to be more productive and they're going to be happier if our policies appeal to intrinsic motivation. If we have networked and that person feels like they're part of a team, that you're not just an employee that can be easily replaced, they're more motivated to work better for you. So yes, definitely social skills and an understanding of psychology will definitely help you in your future career. We have talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs previously, but be aware that this pops up quite a lot. We find right now with the COVID pandemic that quite a lot of people are dealing with safety and physiological needs. And just to review, Maslow is saying that we have to have our basic needs met before we can take care of the big stuff. So if a person is sick, if a person has food insecurity, if the person is not getting their basic biological needs taken care of, then they don't care about their English paper. Then, higher abstract things, are not so important to them. We have students who haven't been super productive in online learning because they're trying to earn money for their families. They may be the only person in their family working. They are handling what they need to handle for the basic Maslow needs, and I support that. I'm working with those students. We've come up with a plan. But again, if you're worried about being evicted, if your utilities have been cut off, if you don't have water to your house, taking your math quiz doesn't seem as important in that moment. So again, just like at school, we have the Maslow drawer with the Band-Aids and the feminine products and a couple of snacks. I understand that if you need a Band-Aid and your finger's bleeding, that you can't focus on what we're doing in class because your body has a primary need in that moment. Okay? Emotion. Keep in mind, emotion is highly subjective, it's highly personal, and people are not going to react the way you think that they should react when you think they should react that way. Okay. So, for example, a funeral. Okay. Um, Not everyone behaves the way you think they would at a funeral. Some people have a delayed emotional reaction and they have their big cry session 3 weeks later. Some people process things in a different rate. I've seen people at funerals who are very businesslike, like, I've got to finish this, we've got to make sure the flowers are perfect, and they've put their grief kind of on the in the box again, and that box is going to pop open at some point. So again, if you go to those situations and you're like, people aren't responding the way I thought they would, it's not that that person's not in grief, they're just processing it in a different order. And a lot of times it's for survival. Not everybody feels comfortable having that big emotional moment in front of 400 of their closest friends. Sometimes it comes months later. Sometimes it's the first Father's Day, the deceased person's first birthday after their death, and that's when it hits you. So when we talk about emotion, not everybody processes emotions the same way. Um, Graduation, again, I had a huge argument with my parents on my graduation day. I was stressed out. It had to be perfect. I was happy to graduate, but it's not uncommon that at those big moments that, you feel some stress, you feel some anxiety. Even though it's a happy day, it's a huge change. And so sometimes those negative emotions pop out too, and that's human. Okay. Um, so yeah, some degree of emotional control is possible, but large, big, huge emotions have to come out at some point. So bottling up grief, oh, it's fine, we're going to keep it going, keep it pushing, at some point that grief is going to come out. And if it doesn't, that person's going to have issues. That person may start to have panic attacks. That person may have uncontrollable anger and they're like, I don't know why I'm mad. So any big emotion that you have, if you don't take some time to process it at some point, it's going to come out anyway. Think of it as being like a balloon. I can only stuff so much air into a balloon before the balloon pops. I have to let some of that air out or we're going to have a huge explosion. Okay. So in very much the same way, emotions are the same way. What about breaking up? A lot of times people will try to go from one big relationship straight into the next one, and doing that may not always be the healthiest thing, especially if you really loved your ex, if you had a lot of experiences that you're having to kind of process and work through. You need to go through a grieving process before you can move on to the next relationship in a healthy fashion. And that grieving process is different lengths for different people. You'll hear some people say, oh, it's got to be half the length of the relationship. So if you were with that person for 2 years, you need to be single for a year. I don't know that there's necessarily a perfect amount of time to be single, um, but the idea here is that it is healthy to process what you've been through before you jump into the next relationship, because those unresolved situations can definitely bleed into the next relationship, and you want to have that fresh start with the new person. So it's not a bad thing to be single sometimes and work on yourself, and really make sure that that box is closed and we've cataloged it and we've dealt with that. We dealt with the stuff in that box. that's helpful. Um, so the polygraph test, moving on to that, also known as the lie detector test. This is not covered on the AP test anymore. But when you see like the Maury Show and, shows about crime and, the legal justice, criminal justice system, you see polygraph testing, but polygraph testing is very inaccurate. So polygraph testing is no longer allowed in courts, believe it or not. They might use it to question somebody, but any of the polygraph results cannot be admitted into court because the polygraph test is basically measuring how upsetting you find the question. So if I ask you an upsetting question or an offensive question, it may register as if you're lying, but you're not. So again, we might use it to question somebody, but it's not scientifically reliable enough for admission into the court record. Okay, so it's measuring your heart rate, how fast you're breathing. And there are people who are also really cool liars. Like they don't get flustered, they don't get shaken up. So for that reason, we don't use the polygraph test. And it's also not included on the AP test anymore because it is so notoriously unreliable. Body language, I'll start wrapping this up. I know this is getting a little bit long. Keep in mind the body language can be a good indicator of how the person really feels. So I know that I have a very truthful face. You guys have seen, I don't really have a lot of control over what my face does in some situations. But again, basic facial expressions are true for many cultures. So if I travel to Italy, even though I don't speak Italian, I can tell when a mom's upset with her kid, basic body language, hostility. We can walk down the river in Paris and see which couples are in love based on their body language. And sometimes you can tell when a couple's about to break up based on their body language. Here's a few of my favorite examples. This is a month or so before Christina Aguilera declared filed for divorce against her first husband, and you see her, she's kind of pulling her shoulders in, almost like she's trying to protect herself a little bit. He's trying to cuddle up, but she's got her hands kind of pushing his away. You can see Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise. She's just kind of over it. And Jared Leto is not really into Scarlett Johansson here. She is leaning in for the kiss. She is super into him, and he's checking his cell phone. And my all-time favorite, way back in the day when you guys were still in diapers probably, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez were actually engaged. And this picture was taken, I believe it was about a week before they called off their wedding. But again, her body language, her shoulders are back, she's leaning in for the kiss, her eyes are closed, and he's checking out somebody else. So it is possible with body language that you can kind of tell if there's trouble in paradise. Body language is very telling. Okay? Where we're going to end for today, I just wanted to quickly cover some of the theories of motivation. The James Lange theory states that emotion results from your interpretation of autonomic arousal. So let's say you're driving your car and you just barely miss getting into a wreck. Like another car almost sideswipes you. After the fact, your heart rate increases, you get the clammy palms, it's like your body has a delayed reaction, and you decide how you feel based on what your body's going through. So I am assigning an emotion based on what my body's doing here. The Cannon-Bard theory states that physiological response may occur without the presence of the emotion. So in other words, multiple emotions can elicit the same bodily reaction. So fear and joy can both cause an increased heart rate, even though fear and joy are very different emotions. The body responds to both of those emotions the same way. And then the two-factor theory states that emotion depends on both your autonomic arousal and how we cognitively interpret that. So if you're annoying and then my blood pressure goes up, I can assume I'm angry, right? if I get irritated every time my little brother walks in the room, and now all of a sudden my heart rate goes up, I can tell that my body's starting to spike a little bit, I'm assigning an emotion based on what my body is doing. Okay, so motivation and emotion can be quite fun. Definitely look into the book. There's some good crash course videos kind of summarizing this as well, and I'll link those as well. But again, you know, in this chapter, we're talking not just about motivation and emotion, but also human sexuality, looking at like lie detectors, you know, what are some of the tells that you can detect if somebody's lying to you. So definitely look into that. But it's a fun chapter, and you know, there you go. So please reach out if you guys have any questions. I'm here to help, and have a great week. Thanks, guys.